Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of ACC Audible. Your buddy Ian is here, and I have some terrible news. Your good friend Ken, one of my best friends, unfortunately could not be here with us tonight. So, you are stuck with me blabbing on for the next 20-30 minutes about a bunch of random college football stuff. And as you know, when Ken's not here, I talk about numbers and stats way too much. We really don't have a lot to go off of early in the season, so I'm going to pull some out of thin air, but you guys should enjoy it. So first of all, I just want to thank you guys again for listening. Our viewership has been extremely up so far this year, which is fantastic. We've had some really great comments sent in, and on the next podcast, Ken and I are going to dive into some of the mailbag because I love going back and forth with him where we build off each other on some of these mailbag questions. So thanks, guys, for sending those in. Once again, if you do want to send us questions, email us at accaudible@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Facebook or on Instagram. So a crazy week in the ACC, a lot of conference matchups in week one, which is something I'm not particularly accustomed to. Really didn't have that FCS week one that we normally do. And we kind of have it in week two, which is always interesting. But this week, there's only one ACC on ACC matchup, and that is Miami, North Carolina. It's an 8 p.m. ACC network game at Kenan Stadium in Chapel Hill. So that's going to be a fun one to look into. The rest of the teams are basically all in non-conference mode. There's some pretty easy teams that are getting played against this weekend, so some pretty easy wins for the ACC. But there's a couple of difficult out-of-conference games as well. And Ken and I shockingly went both for the upset of Texas A&M on Clemson, looking at our picks. But we'll get into that a little bit later after we do our recap of week number one. So if you guys saw week number one, Ken and I both went 7-4. You know, we took a couple of gambles, and this includes the Miami game. We took a couple of gambles. We thought that Florida wasn't that good, and they actually did fall a few spots in the poll this week, so the pollsters agreed as well. But yeah, just Florida didn't look very good in that game. Miami made so many mistakes. We talked about this last week, over 100 yards of penalties, a lot of stuff to clean up, but in the end, Ken and I were wrong on that game. The other ones we thought were pretty obvious. We all picked Alabama, NC State, Clemson. We all picked Syracuse and Notre Dame as well. So the ones that we disagreed on were we both got Florida State wrong. And on the flip side, unfortunately, I didn't pick UVA. Pittsburgh lost to UVA. Great win by Virginia there, going up to Heinz Field. Ken got Boston College correct. Virginia Tech had 5 turnovers, just didn't play very well, lost by 7. I got this one right. UNC did pull it out in Mac Brown's first coaching trip back to Chapel Hill. They played that game in Charlotte for the belt kickoff, and they beat South Carolina. Really great game. We'll talk about their quarterback a little bit coming up here. And then I got the Wake Forest-Utah State game correct on Friday night. Guys, if you did not see it, the Utah State-Wake Forest game was fantastic. It ended up within the last minute. Wake Forest actually scored a touchdown to take the lead, and then they intercepted Utah State on their last drive to seal it. Incredible victory there. But mainly jumping into week two, we have to analyze these games in the lens of the whole season. And what's important when you look at the whole season? Well, coaching, how the team's cohesive, and quarterbacks. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about quarterbacks before we jump into our week number 2 predictions. Trevor Lawrence did not look very good this weekend. He's one of the very few true freshmen to go lead his team out to a national championship win. That obviously happened last year. He took over as a starter after the 4th game when Kelly Bryant was replaced as a starter. And that's a whole nother topic to talk about with Kelly Bryant. But yeah, Trevor Lawrence did not look very good this weekend. Even though Clemson dominated in their game, they won 52-14 over Clemson on Thursday night. Trevor Lawrence was only 13 for 23, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. I really wonder what Ken's opinion is on this, and we'll get into this a little more next time, but just about those 2 interceptions, clearly not a good look for Trevor Lawrence. He didn't throw many interceptions last year, so maybe they were looking ahead to the game this weekend. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's possible, but we heard in the playoffs last year that Clemson completely overlooked Notre Dame and purposely concentrated on Alabama. And they ended up beating Notre Dame and shutting them down anyway. But I wonder if they did that here as well, where they know that talent-wise they can win and it's a home game. So I'm kind of curious because the preparation did not seem there. They did not seem very sharp. But on the other hand, ETN for Clemson, fantastic. 12 carries, 205 yards and 3 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns came from 90 yards out. ETN is a beast, an absolute beast. That's why certain guys like Feaster apply for the transfer portal and stuff like that. So Trevor Lawrence struggled, but the run game there, absolutely fantastic. So flipping over to Clemson, the second favorite team over there in the Atlantic Division. Tommy DeVito is a sophomore. He played a little bit last year. We obviously saw that. There are rumors he might start. But last year he threw about 50% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Not a big sample size though. But guys, he was not good this weekend. 17 for 35. That's less than 50%. 176 yards with 2 interceptions. When we looked at Dino Babers this year, we thought that this could be a year he could really stand out. People were picking him for 11 wins with just a loss to Clemson, going to a really good bowl game. But it's going to be hard to match that with that kind of performance. Babers Syracuse offense is very good, very fast-paced, prolific offense. And they just played against Liberty. So not the toughest opponent, but it was pretty disappointing to see what happened there. Syracuse is playing against a Maryland team this weekend, actually, and Maryland just beat Howard in Mike Loxley's coaching review 79-0. They only allowed 68 total yards of offense while outgaining them with 623. But of course, the Howard Bison play in the MEAC, the MEAC, and you've not heard of that conference for a reason. So not a great team, but ex-Virginia Tech quarterback Josh Jackson looked pretty dang good in that game. He threw 4 touchdown passes before they took him out, but definitely not a great thing to look into for Syracuse. But guys, I don't know if you saw it, but in the Syracuse Liberty game this weekend was absolutely nuts for one reason. First of all, Syracuse traveled down to Lynchburg to play against Liberty. So good for Liberty getting some good opponents to come to their stadium there. But guys, Hugh Freeze, we all remember him, of course. He was down there at Ole Miss, and he had guys like Laramie Tunzel and Treadwell, and there were a bunch of scandals and rumors behind how they were recruited there at Ole Miss. And then we found out Hugh Freeze was calling up escorts and prostitutes from the Detroit area, strangely enough, on his phone, and that was investigated, and he was fired. And he claims he's a changed man, and who knows what's going on in his heart. It could be true, but he was hired by Liberty last year to become their new head football coach. But his first coaching experience for Liberty was from the box, but it was not a normal coaching from the box. He had a staph infection or something weird, and he was literally in a hospital bed in the coaching box. I am not kidding. Go look it up. He's literally laying in a hospital bed in the coaching box, and he was still calling plays. I mean, we all certainly here at ACC Audible hope that coach is all right, but it was pretty funny to watch this go down. So the rumor is he had an MRI, and they found excess fluid around some nerves where he had an operation, and he basically hasn't been able to practice with the guys for the last 16, 17 days or something like that. And so, yeah, he entered the game in a wheelchair, and they had a hospital bed in the coach's box to support his back. And the best part of this whole thing, he gave his pregame talk via an iPad. Literally, he talked into an iPad, and one of his other coaches held his iPad up in the locker room to give the pregame talk. And then he gave his media session the same way. Ridiculous. But he actually called plays, guys. He called the first and second down plays, and on third down, he consulted with his defensive coordinators. But he's not cleared to travel to this weekend's game, so we don't know what he's going to do. But pretty hilarious coaching debut. At the end of the game, when Dino Babers was coming across the field where you'd normally shake the head coach's hand, he just waved up at the box, and Hugh Freeze gave him a quick point and a wave. Amazing, guys. Anyway, jumping back on some concern at QB against that Liberty team. I know Hugh Freeze was calling that great defense, but Tommy DeVito did not look good. Flipping to another quarterback concern this season for Duke, Quentin Harris, a senior. He's starting in place of Daniel Jones, who obviously came out early last year to be a first-round pick of the Giants. But, Quentin Harris played admirably last season. He threw 68 passes only, 50% completion percentage, super similar to DeVito. But he had 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. And while Daniel Jones was out, he was hurt in part of the Northwestern game, and he played the Baylor game. Quentin Harris looked really good. He's also a good runner. He ran 46 attempts last year for 5 touchdowns, 4.2 yard per carry average. So when you put a guy in there who last year 12 touchdowns to 1 interception as a backup against good teams too, not in mop-up duty, he didn't do very well against Alabama. So the first half, obviously, we see they were only down 14-3, but man, Duke just got destroyed in the second half. He was only 12 for 22 for 97 yards with 2 interceptions. He ran the ball 10 times, didn't average anywhere near close to his career average, only 13 yards in those 10. Duke has a little bit of concern with Quentin Harris. They have one of their best defenses coming back this year. They were not very good last year, but they were young and rangy. And so Coach Cutcliffe was really hopeful for Duke's defense. But if their offense performs this way, I don't know if they can do very much this season. And on the other hand, coming up at the end of this month on Friday night, Duke actually plays at Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech also had some quarterback issues this weekend. So for Virginia Tech, they traveled up to Chestnut Hill to play Boston College. And Ryan Willis, he started most of last year for VT after the Josh Jackson injury. He was just really inconsistent. It seemed like he lacked a lot of mental focus, which we've seen from him a little bit before. But he threw 3 interceptions. 2 of those were in the end zone, by the way, guys. And he lost a fumble. Absolutely terrible. But overall, 29 for 47, 344 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Virginia Tech moved the ball pretty well. That held A.J. Dillon 23 carries to 81 yards. But Virginia Tech had 5 turnovers. They had a muffed punt, which basically gave Boston College the ball on the 10-yard line. They outscored Boston College in first downs 29-18. They essentially had the same yardage, but Virginia Tech had time possession. Just repeated turnovers, like I said, 2 in the end zone and then giving them basically a free score. And they only lost by 7, but Ryan Willis looked inconsistent. As a Virginia Tech fan, like I am, you've got to hope that helps focus him, where he realizes he can't slack off at all, because some of those were just plain mental errors. On one of those interceptions he threw in the end zone, he threw it in a double coverage, and he actually had a receiver from the slot wide open. It would have been thrown it to him about the 3-yard line. It would have been a walk-in touchdown. But guys, we can't just dwell on negatives. We got to look at a little positive. Florida State, man. Florida State lost. Okay, I get it. They blew an 18-point lead, but if you are a Noles fan, there's a ton to be positive about in this context. I mean, look, you guys look way better than last year. You were 5-7 last year, the first losing season in like 44 years or something ridiculous like that, and the first bowl miss in that long too. But you guys looked way, way better. The team you lost to, they're actually ranked now. They're a pretty dang good football team. And that true freshman quarterback, well, he was a ESPN top 300 a couple years ago. He's a pretty good player. So don't put your heads down. James Blackman looked better than I've seen him ever play before. 23 for 33, 327 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then your boy Cam Akers ran the ball 15 times, 116 yards and a touchdown. The offense, though, didn't put up a single point in the second half. That was big. The adjustments are something I'd be a little bit concerned about if I was a Florida State fan. They were up 24-6 at one point and also 31-13. They blew the lead. The Florida State defense gave up 621 points. And allowed Boise to have the ball for over 40 minutes. So definitely a little bit of concern there when your offense moves as fast as Florida State's does under Taggart and Briles. The question there is, if you score a touchdown in 10 seconds or if you go 3 and out in 10 seconds, the defense gets no rest either way. So Florida State scored a lot of points in the first half, completely sputtered, didn't score a single point in the second half, and they just gave up the win. But the bottom line is you guys have a good quarterback. This season has a lot of promise. Good job by James Blackman, giving him a shout out. Flipping over to NC State real quick, McKay did a really good job, 25 for 37, 308 yards and a touchdown. Great job replacing Ryan Finley. I mentioned last week I was kind of curious to see how Dave Doran's team does without Finley. He was there for 5 years, a very experienced starter, and I thought that was part of why they did so well, is they had so much experience on that team. But McKay did a really, really good job this week for UNC, albeit against an Eastern Carolina team that we really don't know how good they are this year, probably not very well. But here's the one that really is a big deal. UNC, guys, with Sam Howell. He's a freshman from North Carolina. He is the real deal. He went 15 for 24, 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Javonte Williams added 18 carries, 102 yards. But Sam Howell looks great. Mac Brown gets the win in his coaching debut. Congratulations to Mac Brown. He's assembled a great group of coordinators under him. And this is actually a pretty scary team, guys. Everybody had picked South Carolina last week, 75%. They didn't expect this team to do well. Well, Sam Howell did really well. Played a great game. Very poised for a young gentleman, the freshman from North Carolina. And finally, another quarterback shout out I've got to give, UVA. I love to hate on UVA, but you know what? UVA is a great team this year. I probably would have voted for them or Miami to win the division if I was actually an ACC writers poll. And UVA was obviously picked to win by the writers this year. But Perkins is the real deal. 20 for 34, 181 yards only, but 2 touchdowns. Also ran the ball 18 times for 44 yards. That includes sacks, of course, so the average is a little lower. But he long of 27 as well. UVA's defense deserves a lot of credit in this game. They held Pitt to only 263 yards and forced 2 turnovers, but UVA's offense was very smart. Perkins is not only a good game manager, but he can light it up as well. Obviously, he doesn't turn it over very much, and that's very key, but he makes plays when you need it. They actually held the ball for 34 minutes in this game, so they definitely won time of possession, but they only had 310 yards themselves, so I'm kind of curious if that was game plan only, where they purposely tried to bleed the clock a little bit. But Pitt, on the other hand, was not expecting to have a good passing game. Another quarterback disaster, I'd say, but we didn't really expect from Pitt to have good quarterback play. Pickett, 21 for 41. 185 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So that wasn't surprising. But Pittsburgh's lack of run game was. And it makes me wonder if UVA's run defense is really that great, because Pittsburgh has been able to run the ball pretty well. Flipping to the other side of the ball, just giving some defensive shout-outs this week. Clemson had 4 sacks and 8 tackles for a loss this weekend. Fantastic against Georgia Tech, who has been taking shotgun snaps for the first time in 15 years or whatever. Also, Wake Forest won. But something to be concerned about as a Wake fan is they were stopped in the backfield a lot. They were tackled for a loss 10 times and had 3 sacks. Just a shout out to David Woodward, linebacker. He had 18 tackles, 6 assists. So that's 24 total tackles, y'all. He had 1 sack, 3 tackles for a loss, and 2 forced fumbles. The guy was a beast in this game. I'm telling you, you got to watch this Utah State Wake Forest game. And then Syracuse, 14 tackles for a loss and 8 sacks against that Liberty offense. They obviously held them to no point, so big shout out there for the Syracuse defense. And then Florida State bouncing back a little bit. I know in the second half they gave up a lot of points. The adjustments weren't there, but they did have 6 sacks and 8 tackles for a loss. On the other hand, they were stopped a lot themselves. 8 sacks, 11 TFLs. So, as I said, Utah State, Wake Forest, guys, had one heck of a game. It was from last Friday night. You've got to go watch it. Newman for Wake Forest was pretty dang good as well. Giving him another shout out on the quarterback side. 34-47, 401 yards and 3 touchdowns. I feel like John Gruden here giving all these shout outs to quarterbacks. But man, in the beginning of the season, you can learn a lot from your quarterbacks that tell you what's going to happen the remainder of the season. I know at this point last year, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks that made it to the playoffs had not even started a game yet, which is a totally random and fun fact. They didn't start until weeks 4 or later, with especially Ian Book and Trevor Lawrence, and then also Tua. But it's just very interesting to look and see how quarterback plays at the beginning of the year, because that can tell a lot about your season. But this Utah State game, guys, really competitive back and forth. There were 9 lead changes. Wake Forest scored that last touchdown with 1:08 left to go ahead, 38-35. The yardage was huge, 596 for Utah State, 579 for Wake. Time of possession, Wake also kind of dominated that, but also Utah State had 3 turnovers to Wake's 1. So it's kind of crazy to win the turnover battle by that much, but to barely win the game. Guys, shooting forward to this week, we've got some good matchups though. Friday night, William and Mary is playing at UVA at 8 p.m. Just the reason why I mentioned that game, first of all, you can get tickets for $6. So if you're down near Charlottesville, you might as well go. It's $6. But also, Mike London returns to Scott Stadium. I find that fantastic. So Mike London, obviously coached at UVA for a couple years, but just to give his story, he was actually a police officer, very decorated, a high man of integrity, and he was actually became the football coach at Richmond, the Richmond Spiders, and he won a national championship on the FCS level. He was hired by UVA. Things didn't go so well there for him, but he was such a gentleman, very intelligent, very kind man. When he was fired, he ended up going on a support staff for a year, but then he became Howard's head coach. That's right, the Howard Bison, the team that Maryland destroyed last week that I brought up. He ended up being their head coach for a bit, but he was hired back to take over for Laylock to be at William & Mary. So it's very interesting to see that he is going to be back at Scott Stadium. I'm kind of curious how they react to him now that they've seen Bronco Mendenhall kind of turn around this UVA program. If they have any love for their old boss, or if they just kind of don't like him. I don't expect too many people to be in the stands. I do know UVA is running a promotion this year. In order to get tickets against Virginia Tech the Friday after Thanksgiving, you have to donate at least $100, I think, or be a season ticket holder. And that's because every time VT plays there, it's at least 60-70% Virginia Tech fans. So they don't want to sell single-game tickets. So they're basically going to jack up those prices for the game by forcing you to purchase other stuff to get them. So I think what's probably going to happen is some UVA fans might do that and then sell them aftermarket to get higher costs, etc. So maybe this year, because UVA is better, they could actually have a full stadium, but I don't expect it to be super full. But I hope Mike Lennon is a good welcome home. He's a good man, seems to be a really good guy of integrity, and he did run that program well. Things didn't go the way they wanted, but he did have him ranked at one point. Friday night, Wake at Rice. I think we all know what's going to happen there. Pretty interesting to see Wake go on the road and make some of these games against Group of 5 and lesser teams. That's on CBS Sports Network at 8 o'clock. Moving to Saturday, a ton of matchups, mainly early in the day. We have Ohio visiting Pittsburgh at 11 a.m. Honestly, guys, I can't remember the last time I saw a football game in the Eastern time zone start before noon. Kind of weird. Like, college game day is still going on. I mean, I just don't get it. Doesn't make sense, but they probably need that stadium or the parking or something for later in the day, I guess. But that one's on ACC Network as well. Syracuse, number 21, traveling to Maryland. This is actually a really, really difficult game. It's a noon game on ESPN down at Maryland Stadium. Used to be called Bird Stadium. Maryland looked really good last weekend against a lower-level team. Syracuse struggled, and Ken and I are both a little back and forth on this game. I mean, just to be honest with you guys, we're taking the ACC in every single matchup this weekend, except we're both picking Texas A&M to upset Clemson, and we both picked Miami to beat UNC. But we can jump through some of those games in a little bit here. We're going to take Syracuse over Maryland, and mainly because we're still high on Syracuse because of last year, and we still have thoughts of Maryland from the last 15 years where they've not been super good. But this is a game that Ken and I talked about this week as being super, super difficult to pick. Maryland looked like everything went right under new head coach Loxley, who didn't do a very good job when he was at New Mexico State. But he seems to have gotten better and better every year. He did such a great job at Alabama last year calling their plays. And we've seen him with a consistent player in Josh Jackson do well in week one. Everything worked well. His defense played well. So if Syracuse can't clean up some of the mistakes that they've made in week one against Liberty, if DeVito can't get on track, this is going to be a loss. The ACC plays the Big Ten, I believe, 3 times this season at a conference that's already scheduled pre-bowl. And that would be Rutgers has a game, Maryland plays against Syracuse, and then Pittsburgh plays against Penn State. And you kind of assume that, the ACC will win the Rutgers game. You assume that the Big Ten will win the Pittsburgh game. So this game kind of could be the tiebreaker in the conference matchup. And I think that's very important for conference prestige, especially when you see some of these, a better team in the ACC playing a mid-pack team in the Big Ten. You better win. I'm very curious to see what happens here. Both these teams have not allowed a single point thus far this year, so I'm kind of curious to see what goes on. Next game also at noon on ESPNU, Lane Stadium in Blacksburg, Virginia. Virginia Tech hosts ODU. Now, ODU had the huge upset of Virginia Tech last year. Their backup quarterback came in and slung the ball all over the place, was deadly accurate. They beat Virginia Tech. Huge loss for VT. Ended up causing a little locker room turmoil, and a guy got kicked off the team from it. Absolutely crazy. But the last time ODU was at Virginia Tech Stadium just a couple of years ago, Virginia Tech completely shut them out and dominated. So which team are we going to see? The defense that gave up a ton of points and the offense couldn't do so great, or the defense that did a great job? So Virginia Tech last week, their defense did a decent job, but not particularly great. Obviously, I talked about all the turnovers that gave Boston College some new life, and at least once where it gave them some easy-ish points. So the defense didn't do terrible. However, when you look at it, ODU's team does not look very good this year. They had a win last weekend against Norfolk State, but it was a tough win, I believe, in overtime. So ODU not looking very good this year. You expect Virginia Tech to pull this out, and Ken and I both took them. Moving to the 12:30 game on ACC Network Extra. That's right, not the ACC Network, but ACC Network Extra. So ESPN family of networks. 12:30, as I said, at Carter Finley. No need to talk about this one. WCU playing against NC State. Expect NC State to win and keep rolling on. I believe they play West Virginia coming up here in a couple weeks, so just another good tune-up game for them as they jump into that. Moving next, USF, Southern Florida, down there with Charlie Strong, former Louisville and Texas coach, playing at Georgia Tech. This is going to be an interesting game. South Florida did not look very good last week at all. They've kind of trended down the last couple of years, but Georgia Tech looked pretty awful last week, and it makes sense. I forgive Jeff Collins. I forgive Georgia Tech. We've obviously talked about how much we love Jeff Collins so far, just everything he's brought to that program. He's definitely a Georgia Tech guy through and through. He loves Waffle House, so we absolutely love the guy. But this is actually going to be a pretty tough matchup. We both went with Georgia Tech. We think they're going to get their first ever win under the new head coach. We're going to go with them over the Bulls from Tampa. Number 12, Texas A&M at number 1, Clemson's the 3:30 game on ABC. And honestly, the reason I'm going to go with this is Kellen Mond out there at Texas A&M under Jimbo Fisher did such a good job last year against Clemson in this game. I know it was at College Station. This was the one game that almost tripped up Clemson last year. And this was a game in which they switched quarterbacks partway through and gave Trevor Lawrence the opportunity to actually play. The game actually was pretty close down to the wire, like I said. I just have some sort of bad feeling about this, but now that I'm talking about it, I'm seeing the beautiful Clemson orange pall on my computer screen, and how can you not love that? And I'm hoping Clemson wins. Obviously, it's great for the conference, but A&M's a better team than people give them credit for. Obviously, we know that some SEC teams aren't that good, like Ole Miss. They just lost to Memphis. Again. So Ole Miss not doing well. There's a few really, really bad SEC teams right now, and Florida looked pretty bad too, as we said. But A&M's not one of them, guys. A&M is a good-looking ball club. We both picked them. I'm glad because if I'm wrong, Ken will also be wrong, and we'll still be tied. Okay, so next game, Richmond is traveling up to Boston College. Good job for Boston College to pull out that win at Alumni Stadium last week. They're still up there at Chestnut Hill again this weekend. Also on the ACC Network Extra at 3:30. BC's schedule is pretty easy for the next couple of weeks, guys. They have a chance to be 7-0 before their next really, really tough matchup. So I'd look forward to Boston College, guys, getting in the rankings here in the next couple of weeks. I know they're just 1-0 now, but next week they have Kansas that you just assume they have a good shot of winning, and that's at home also. Then they're at Rutgers, and that's the game that I mentioned earlier. We've got to assume the ACC wins that one. Then they play against Wake. That could be a difficult game coming up, their 5th game of the season. Louisville looked way better than we thought the other night, so that could be a tough one. And then they play NC State and Clemson, and then Syracuse, then Florida State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh. So the second half of their schedule is so hard. Guys, expect them to at least be 4-0 heading into that Wake Forest game. Possibly they could be 7-0 before they head into some really tough showdowns at the end of October, but they will be ranked very soon. I also expect to see them to win more than 7 games this year. Boston College has only won 7 games, but they've won 7 games in 4 of the 5 seasons that Steve Adazio has been there. Last season, they had a really good shot to win their 8th one in the bowl game before it got canceled. So I'm looking forward to big things from BC in the first half of the year, but it'll be interesting to see what happens when they get in that tough Clemson, Syracuse, Florida State, Notre Dame stretch. Didn't go very well last year. Classic matchup, 5 o'clock on the ACC Network. You don't see a lot of games starting at that time. But University of Louisiana at Monroe is playing at Florida State. This game has happened multiple times over the last few years. I believe the last time Jimbo Fisher was the head coach of Florida State, this was his opponent. They won that game to go to a ball game. Nothing to really talk about here. Florida State better win this game, or I don't know, we're going to make Ken do something absolutely ridiculous. Next team after that, NC A&T at Duke. Obviously a fantastic team in the National Black Colleges and Universities. For NC A&T, they're in the Celebration Bowl often. Very, very good program. They're at Duke. You expect Duke to pull this guy out at Wallace Wade, 6 o'clock ACC Network Extra. The next team is Eastern Kentucky's at Louisville, 7 o'clock on the Extra as well. Very good for the Cardinal fans to get 2 night games in a row. That place was rocking. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw on Monday night. Everyone expected Notre Dame to just absolutely roll over Louisville, but that game was pretty close in the beginning, especially the first half. Notre Dame pulled away a little bit from a lot of Louisville mistakes, but I'm going to talk about that game in detail coming up here in just a second, because that game actually, I think, tells a lot about this season. It just goes to show that when you have a coaching change and new players, stuff can be completely different than what you think. Anyway, so just moving on to our next game here, UNC at Miami, 8 o'clock on the ACC Network. A lot of ACC Network. It's getting a workout this weekend. We see that Miami's coming back on the field. They've already had a week off. So very good for them. They have a lot of opportunities to fix some of the mistakes they had against Florida, against UNC. We love Mac Brown. We know they did a great job last week, but you got to figure with 2 weeks off, they probably cleaned up a lot of those mistakes. So we're going to have to go with Miami here. They seem to have pretty good quarterback play. The offensive line is the big question, but we don't think UNC's defense can do quite as much to get in there. As you heard, I didn't mention them quite on the strong defenses checklist. But guys, let's talk about that Louisville-Notre Dame game before we wrap up. That's the one I kind of left off, and that's because it was the bookend of the weekend on Monday night. The Fighting Irish ended up coming away with a 35-17 win over Louisville, but the Cardinal Stadium, Papa John's Stadium, was rocking. I've never seen it that loud. They did an expansion about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they closed in the end of the stadium and made it much, much larger. But the team was so bad last year, it was empty. There was no one in the stands. Well, tonight, on Monday night, this year, the stadium was rocking. It was filled with people, almost at max capacity, and it was loud with the end closed in. Dynamics and acoustics are so affected by architecture, and so great job by them building that stadium. It was rocking loud, you could tell, and the fans were hype. It was a blackout. It was really, really cool to see. They had a 14 deadlock going into the second quarter. Louisville actually had the lead there for a while, 14-7. But then the second quarter, just a Louisville mistake gives the ball right back. So Notre Dame went into half up 21-14. But if you didn't see it, guys, there was an opportunity in this game for Louisville to capitalize. They turn the ball over, but then Notre Dame turns the ball over. So they get the ball right back, and then they turn it over again. 3 plays in a row, there was a turnover. Absolutely ridiculous. Not very good, clean football. That was 2 of Louisville's 3 turnovers, so not good. But yeah, guys, Louisville actually won time of possession. They had more first downs. They didn't have more total yards, but the turnover game absolutely killed them. Juwan Pass didn't look particularly great, 12 for 27, 134 yards. But in the first half of the game, he did look pretty good. He had 2 touchdown runs. He did a really, really good job with his feet in this ball game. So there's definitely some stuff to look forward to from Juwan Pass coming out. I mean, he did have 67 yards on 16 carries, so pretty dang good. Hawkins for them, had a pretty good game too. 19 carries, 122 yards. And Louisville did try a pass from a wide receiver on a reverse. Almost worked out, not quite, but they did try to pull out all the stops. They were super, super close to it. Ian Book did not look that sharp. 1 touchdown, no interceptions, but he was only 14 for 23. He's pretty good with his legs, though. 14 carries, 81 yards. Pretty impressive. But Louisville's defense didn't do a great job against the run. Tony Jones Jr., they get 15 carries, 110. So something to look out for Notre Dame and Louisville in the future. But something I just thought was absolutely amazing from this game was Ian Book did not look great at quarterback. He had a lot of overthrows, wasn't very accurate. He actually broke a dancer's nose. That's right, guys. So a Louisville dance team member is going to have to go to a specialist to get her nose fixed because an Ian Book pass hit her in the nose and broke her nose. So yeah, she was just doing her dance routine on the sideline and he tried to throw the ball away. So absolutely ridiculous. I don't know. I just don't even know what to say. But yeah, so the person who was hit, she's a dental hygiene major. She's from Indiana and she just made a total joke about it. And I don't know, it's just kind of amazing to see headlines like this. But guys, should be a good week in ACC football. It should be one of those weeks where you just win. You just win all of these games, no question. Every ACC team should win this weekend. I know we picked against Clemson, but guys, all these games are incredibly winnable, except Miami UNC. One of them has to lose, I guess. But it should be a great week for the ACC. Congratulations to Satterfield for coming out and showing Louisville in prime time, being really competitive. Great job by the Louisville fans. I know I've had some mixed experiences with them at games, just how they cheer and stuff. They proved me wrong. They came out in full force. They were awesome. Ken and I were texting about it, how excited we were for Louisville. And Satterfield's a great coach. We saw what he did at Appalachian State, just all the amazing things he's done. And they talked about him quite a bit on the broadcast. You guys can go back and check that out too, just with how he keeps every single offensive game plan in notebooks, like just paper notebooks that have stains, coffee and water stains on them, everything. It's pretty funny. But yeah, it should be a really, really great week for the ACC. They should dominate. I know I promised you guys last week I would debut my top 25 at the end of the season. I used a dartboard and I had 60 teams on there and I threw a bunch of darts, but I'm going to wait until Ken is here because I have not revealed that to him and I want to hear his reactions with, recording so that, when he laughs at it or when he says it's completely stupid or idiotic, I want to just hear that live so I can record it and put it out there for you guys. But great week in the ACC. Congratulations to all the new coaches. I know things didn't work out particularly well with Satterfield obviously losing this game and Jeff Collins obviously losing his game as well. But Mac Brown came away with a really solid victory in his first game coaching back at UNC. And then we believe that Miami, that they can really, really turn it around down there as well. So it should be a great weekend in the ACC. We hope you guys get to watch a ton of football this weekend. I'll be glued to my couch most of the day. I've got a couple commitments in the morning, but all those 3:30 and later games, I will be glued to my television watching the ACC and probably drinking an ice cold brewski. Well, we thank you guys again for listening to us. If you want to ask us any questions, email us at accaudible@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram and on Facebook now. And obviously, you found a way to follow us already. You're either in the App Store, on the Podbean app, or you're using Google Play. Thank you guys so much for listening to us. Ken and I have a double plan for next week. We're going to try to release 2 podcasts, not just a preview of the games and a discussion of this weekend's games. We're also going to discuss the conferences now that we've seen every team play twice after this weekend. So, Ken and I are going to give our guesses of what we think the rest of the year is going to go like and who we think is actually going to win. And I think this Clemson game is going to be pretty telling, as well as the Miami game this weekend, for what we're going to see the rest of the season. So, for my buddy Ken, who's down there in Florida, thankfully the hurricane didn't do anything with him or mess with any of his friends or my family and friends down there either. We hope that everybody on the East Coast is safe. It's trending off the coast of South Carolina, I guess now, kind of near my aunt and uncle's house. But glad that my buddy Ken is safe. But we will have him back next week to give his amazing insight, and also so I don't have to talk while staring at my computer screen for 30 minutes, because guys, it gets a little awkward. Anyway, for ACC Audible, my name's Ian. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great one.